For nearly 2,000 years, billions of people around the world have recited a prayer believed to be the exact words of Jesus Christ. Parents have taught it to their children, generations have passed it down with absolute devotion, and entire communities have united in a single voice to utter those sacred words known as the Lord's Prayer. But what if I told you that the version you know is incomplete? What if I revealed that there is an original version, more profound, more powerful, more transformative, that was deliberately altered, simplified, and, in some cases, completely omitted from the texts that have reached us? Imagine for a moment the magnitude of this discovery. You grew up reciting words that Jesus never uttered exactly in this way. You've prayed for years using a version filtered, edited, and adapted for political and institutional convenience. The burning question is why? Why alter the original version? Who had the power to decide which of Christ's words should remain and which should disappear? And most importantly, what was so powerful about the original version that needed to be hidden? For centuries, scholars and researchers specializing in ancient texts have uncovered fragments, preserved manuscripts, and oral traditions pointing to a disturbing reality. Christianity's most sacred prayer has been edited, censored, and manipulated throughout history. I'm not talking about minor translation differences or small regional variations. I'm talking about substantial omissions, entire phrases removed, spiritual concepts deliberately simplified to serve interests that had nothing to do with spiritual truth. Have you ever wondered why, even after praying the Lord's Prayer sincerely for years, you sometimes feel like something is missing? Why is there a spiritual thirst that seems never completely quenched, even when you connect with the most sacred words you know? Perhaps it's because you've never had access to the full version. Maybe it's because all these years, you've been praying only fragments of what Jesus truly taught his disciples on that transformative day when they asked, "Lord, teach us to pray." Today, in this video, you will discover truths that have been silenced for centuries. I'm not here to undermine your faith, quite the opposite. I'm here to return it to you in its purest, most authentic form, closer to what truly came from Jesus' lips when he taught his disciples to pray. What you're about to hear might completely transform your spiritual understanding. Some will say it's controversial, others will say it's dangerous, but the truth has always been dangerous to those who profit from ignorance. Ancient manuscripts preserved in remote monasteries, recent archaeological discoveries, and oral traditions maintained by isolated communities for centuries all converge to reveal a startling truth. The Lord's Prayer, as we know it, is but a shadow of what Jesus truly taught. Researchers who have devoted decades to studying Aramaic texts and ancient manuscripts have consistently found evidence that the original version was significantly longer, spiritually more complex, and infinitely more powerful in terms of consciousness transformation. Imagine discovering that your favorite childhood song actually had 3 more verses, the most beautiful, the deepest, the ones that gave complete meaning to the song. But those verses were removed before reaching you. This is exactly what we are dealing with here. Do you feel there's more to your spiritual quest? Something that always seems missing, even when you pray with complete sincerity? Perhaps it's because you've never had access to the complete version of Christianity's most important prayer. In the next few minutes, we're going to discover not just what was hidden, but why it was hidden. We'll understand how decisions made in councils over 1,500 years ago still affect how you connect with the divine today. This is not just a history lesson. It's an invitation to awaken. It's the chance to reclaim something that has always been your right. The authentic way of communicating with the Creator, exactly as Christ taught, without filters, without edits, without political convenience. Recent academic studies on the preservation of ancient texts indicate that many of the oral traditions maintained by isolated Christian communities contain elements absent in any modern biblical version. This is not coincidence. It's evidence of a systematic process of simplification and control. Prepare yourself, because the truth you're about to discover can no longer be silenced. A new generation of spiritual seekers is awakening to the need to return to authentic sources, to the original teachings, to spiritual practices in their purest and most powerful form. Your soul recognized this call, which is why you're here. That's why something inside you already suspected that there was more depth to be discovered. That's why you've always felt that the version you knew, though sacred, was not complete. What you're about to discover in the next few minutes is not just historical information, it's the restoration of a spiritual power that has been yours since birth, but was hidden from you all your life. Let's start with total honesty. Recite in your mind the Lord's Prayer you learned as a child. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? These words are engraved in your memory. They're a part of your deepest spiritual identity. But linguistic studies and analyses of ancient manuscripts suggest this familiar version went through a simplification process that began in Christianity's early centuries. What you recite today is, in fact, a standardized version created to facilitate memorization and unify different Christian traditions. Researchers specializing in Aramaic texts indicate that crucial elements were lost in translation. When you move from Aramaic to Greek, then to Latin, and finally to English, entire concepts simply disappear. It's like trying to translate poetry. Something always gets lost in the process. But it wasn't just accidental loss. Historical analyses of early council documents reveal that deliberate choices were made about which elements to keep and which to remove. Criteria that had more to do with institutional control than with preserving spiritual authenticity. Imagine a puzzle where some pieces have been removed. You still see the overall picture, but sense something is missing. That's exactly what happened with our most sacred prayer. The missing pieces are not minor details. They are elements that completely transform the prayer's meaning and spiritual power. Traditions preserved in Eastern Christian communities suggest that certain phrases held mystical depth that was deliberately simplified. Why? Because a more complex, more spiritual, more empowering version would be harder to control institutionally. When you examine versions preserved in ancient manuscripts, you find differences that are not just about translation, but about fundamental spiritual concepts. For instance, where we now say, Our Father who art in heaven, some ancient traditions preserved something closer to Abba, divine presence that permeates all reality. See the difference. The first version places God in a specific place called heaven. The second recognizes divine presence as something that permeates all existence, including you. It's not a God up there. It's a presence that breathes through all creation. Let's be straightforward. When you pray the simplified version, you're receiving only a fraction of the spiritual power this prayer should have. It's like having a medicine whose formula has been diluted. It still works, but not with original potency. Some manuscripts preserved in ancient monasteries contain significant variations that make us question, are we praying correctly? Did Jesus really teach his disciples exactly in this way that we know today? The disturbing answer is, no, not exactly. Historical documents indicate that in Christianity's first 3 centuries, at least 15 different versions of the Lord's Prayer circulated among Christian communities. Some were shorter, others significantly longer. Some emphasized mystical aspects, others focused on practical elements. The standardization process that resulted in the version we know was not guided by historical authenticity criteria, but by the needs for political unification and institutional control. The version that survived best served the objectives of religious power centralization. And here's something that needs to be said without equivocation. If you've made it this far in the video, it's because something inside you already suspected this. You already felt there was more depth to be discovered. You already perceived that your spiritual thirst wasn't completely satisfied, even when you prayed with total sincerity. This is your chance to go beyond the limitations that were imposed on your spiritual experience. If you want to discover the full version, if you want access to what has been preserved out of sight for most, then subscribe to this channel now, because in the next few minutes I'll reveal not just what was hidden, but how you can incorporate this authentic version into your spiritual life. This is not just another channel talking about religion. This is the place where forbidden truths finally come to light. Click on subscribe, because the journey we're starting goes far beyond this video. You're about to discover a dimension of Christian spirituality that has been kept secret for centuries, preserved only by isolated communities and scholars dedicated to historical truth. The complete version of the Lord's Prayer is not just a historical curiosity, it's a powerful tool for spiritual transformation that can revolutionize your relationship with the divine, and you have the right to know it. To understand what was lost, we need to return to the language Jesus actually spoke, Aramaic. It's not just a matter of translation, it's about preserving the spiritual essence of the words that came from the master's mouth. Aramaic is not just a language, it's a way of thinking, a manner of expressing spiritual realities that other languages simply cannot capture with the same precision. Each word carries layers of meaning that get lost when translated literally. Researchers specializing in ancient Semitic languages indicate that Aramaic possesses a natural poetic structure that creates specific spiritual resonances. When Jesus taught, he wasn't just conveying information, he was creating frequencies of consciousness through the specific combination of sounds, rhythms, and meanings. When Jesus said, Abba, for example, he wasn't merely saying Father in the formal sense we know today. Linguistic studies indicate that Abba carries an intimacy, a closeness, an absolute trust that goes far beyond the word Father in any modern translation. Imagine the difference between calling someone Sir and lovingly addressing them by their first name. It's not just a difference of words, but of relationship. Jesus was teaching his disciples to relate to the Creator in a radically intimate, personal, close way. But this was dangerous for the religious structures that came afterward. A direct, intimate, personal relationship with the divine doesn't need intermediaries, doesn't need complex hierarchies, doesn't need institutional control. And that's precisely why this intimacy was gradually removed from official translations. Manuscripts in preserved Aramaic suggest that entire phrases emphasized this direct relationship. Expressions indicated not only that God is our Father, but that we are literally his children, with all the authority and spiritual power this implies. Academic analyses of ancient texts reveal that the Aramaic Jesus spoke was a specific variant rich in mystical terms and spiritual concepts that simply don't exist in later languages. It was a language developed by a culture that lived in constant awareness of the sacred. Academic research points to the fact that Aramaic has a natural poetic structure that is completely lost in translations. Jesus wasn't just teaching a prayer, he was transmitting a mantra, a spiritual formula with specific rhythm, sonority, and vibratory power. When you recite the Lord's Prayer in English, you're speaking words. When the first disciples recited in Aramaic, they were activating spiritual frequencies. The difference is like comparing reading about music and actually hearing a symphony. Specialized studies suggest that each Aramaic word Jesus chose had multiple layers of meaning. For example, the word we translate as bread had connotations including physical nourishment, spiritual sustenance, divine wisdom, and vital energy. A single Aramaic word encompassed concepts that would require entire sentences to express in English. Some Eastern Christian communities preserved elements of this original sonority. They realized that certain sound combinations, specific word sequences, produced different states of consciousness. Not by accident, but because Jesus chose each word, each rhythm, each pause with specific spiritual purpose. Most impressively, analyses of ancient texts suggest that the original Aramaic version was significantly longer than any version we know today. There were entire petitions, specific invocations, declarations of spiritual power that simply disappeared from later translations. Researchers with access to preserved Aramaic manuscripts in ancient monastery libraries report discovering phrases that completely transform the prayer's nature. Declarations recognizing the practitioner's inner divinity, invocations activating specific centers of consciousness, petitions establishing co-creative spiritual authority with the divine. Why did they disappear? Because they were too powerful. Because they put spiritual power directly in the individual's hands without institutional mediation. Because they transformed each person into their own priest, their own direct channel to the divine. And here's the most disturbing part. It wasn't just carelessness or translation difficulty, it was a deliberate choice. When councils began standardizing Christian texts, they consciously chose versions that maintained centralized religious control, removing elements that could spiritually empower ordinary people. Historical documents from the early councils reveal specific discussions about which Aramaic elements should be preserved and which should be simplified for the Church's unity. It was a euphemism for spiritual censorship. The truth is, you have a right to the complete version. You have a right to the exact words Jesus uttered, with all their original spiritual potency. And that's what we're going to discover together in the next few minutes. Now let's look at the concrete evidence. For decades, archaeological discoveries have revealed manuscripts preserving versions of the Lord's Prayer significantly different from those we know. These are not theories or speculations. They are physical, tangible documents that have survived time and suppression attempts. Fascinatingly, these manuscripts have been found in isolated, unrelated places: monasteries in Syria, caves in Egypt, preserved libraries in Ethiopia, private collections in Armenia, and yet they contain consistent elements not found in the official versions that have reached us. Researchers with access to these documents have identified troubling patterns. The differences are not minor translation variations, they are substantial omissions, entire phrases removed, spiritual concepts simplified to the point of being unrecognizable. One of the most impactful discoveries came from manuscripts preserved by Christian communities that have remained isolated since early centuries. These communities never underwent the reforms and standardizations of the major councils. They orally transmitted, generation after generation, versions containing elements absent in any modern Bible. Imagine this scenario. You discover a song you've known for years actually has 3 more verses that were never commercially recorded. But those verses are the most beautiful, the deepest, the ones that give the song complete meaning. That's what we are dealing with here. Paleographic analyses of ancient texts suggest there was a version of the Lord's Prayer that included specific invocations for activating the inner Christ consciousness. Phrases teaching not just to ask the Father, but to recognize our inner divine, our spiritual authority as legitimate children of the Creator. Discoveries in archaeological sites of the Nile Valley revealed papyrus fragments containing a version of the Lord's Prayer, with explicit statements about our divine nature. Texts affirming not only that we are God's children, but that we carry His essence, His power, His authority. But here's the crucial detail. These more complete versions make perfect sense with the rest of Jesus' teachings. When He said, "The kingdom of heaven is within you." When He taught that ye are gods, when He declared we do greater works. All this connects perfectly with a version of the Lord's Prayer recognizing and activating our inner divine potential. Archaeological discoveries in Dead Sea caves uncovered text fragments suggesting the Essene communities possessed versions of the prayer, including elements of deep meditation and specific consciousness center activation. It was a complex spiritual technology, not just a simple prayer. Manuscripts preserved in Alexandria libraries that survived the fires contain references to Lord's Prayer versions considered inner teachings, reserved for advanced disciples. This suggests Jesus taught the prayer in progressive levels of spiritual depth. Text analyses found in Cappadocian monasteries reveal traditions mentioning a complete version of the Lord's Prayer, transmitted orally from master to chosen disciple, because it was deemed too sacred and powerful to be written. But let me ask you directly, now viewing this video, how often have you prayed the Lord's Prayer feeling something was missing? How often have you felt there was greater depth to reach, an intense connection possible? If you've ever felt this, comment, "I feel there's more." I need to know how many people are simultaneously having this awakening. I need to understand if this thirst for a more authentic, complete, more powerful version is happening globally, or if it's just a few feeling this inner call. Comment below. Have you also always felt there was something deeper in the prayer Jesus taught? Because what I'll reveal next will confirm precisely that intuition already living inside you. Now we need to talk about something uncomfortable, but necessary. How political decisions shaped what you believe to be sacred and immutable. The Council of Nicaea, held in 325 AD, wasn't just a religious meeting. It was a political gathering where Roman Emperor Constantine had clear objectives: unify Christianity to strengthen his empire. To achieve this unification, it was necessary to standardize, simplify, and in many cases eliminate variations considered problematic. Preserved historical documents indicate there were dozens of different versions of the Lord's Prayer circulating among early Christian communities. Some were shorter, others longer. Some emphasized mystical aspects, others focused on practical elements. This diversity was seen as a problem for imperial unification. Imagine this scene: men gathered in a council, deciding which words attributed to Jesus should remain and which should be removed. not based on divine revelation, not guided by spiritual inspiration, but driven by political convenience and the need for control. Surviving council minutes reveal specific discussions about which elements of different Lord's Prayer versions should be retained. The criteria weren't historical or spiritual, they were practical. Which versions would facilitate memorization, which would promote unity, which would maintain clerical authority. The process was brutally simple. Versions emphasizing individual spiritual authority were deemed dangerous. Phrases suggesting direct access to the divine without clerical mediation were marked for removal. Elements that could spiritually empower ordinary people were systematically eliminated. Historical records suggest there was a version of the Lord's Prayer including explicit declarations about our divine nature. Phrases like, "As you are in us, we are in you," or "Your will be our will, for we are one." Imagine the revolutionary power of a prayer, teaching each person to recognize their essential unity with the Creator. But that's exactly the problem. A population recognizing themselves as divine doesn't need religious hierarchies to mediate their relationship with God. A community understanding their inner spiritual authority doesn't easily submit to external controls. This was incompatible with the empire's political objectives. Documents from later councils show this process of editing and removal didn't stop at Nicaea. It continued over the centuries, always with the same pattern. Elements empowering people spiritually were gradually removed, while those maintaining institutional dependence were preserved and emphasized. The Council of Carthage, held in 397 AD, was particularly significant in completing this process. It was where they definitively decided which texts would be part of the official biblical canon. More mystical and empowering versions of the Lord's Prayer were officially rejected as unauthentic or heretical. Later translations intensified this process. When the text moved from Greek to Latin and then to vernacular languages, each translation was an opportunity for more simplification, more removal, more control. What reached you is the result of centuries of institutional filters. Jerome, responsible for the Latin translation known as the Vulgate, had specific instructions on how to simplify texts deemed too complex for ordinary believers. Many mystical elements of the original version were removed in this process. Some Christian communities, especially those remaining isolated from the Great Council's influences, preserved versions retaining elements of the original depth. But these traditions were marginalized, labeled heretical or non-orthodox, precisely because they preserved teachings that placed spiritual power in the hands of the individual. During the Middle Ages, any attempt to restore elements of the original version was viewed as heresy. The Inquisition specifically persecuted groups practicing unauthorized versions of fundamental Christian prayers. It was total control over people's spiritual experience. The irony is devastating. The prayer Jesus taught to liberate and empower his followers was transformed into a tool of control and dependence. The words meant to awaken our divine consciousness were edited to maintain our institutional submission. Reformers like Luther had the opportunity to restore more authentic versions, but chose to keep established versions to avoid more controversies. The fear of political instability outweighed the commitment to spiritual authenticity. But here's a truth they could never completely erase. The authentic version still exists. Fragments of it survived in preserved manuscripts, in protected oral traditions, in communities resisting standardization pressures. And this is exactly what you are about to discover. The original power of the Lord's Prayer was not destroyed, it was only hidden, and the time has come for you to reclaim what has always been yours by right. Let's dive now into the heart of the matter. The word Jesus actually used when he taught his disciples to call the Creator. He didn't say Father in the formal sense we know. He said Abba, and this difference changes everything. To understand this revelation's depth, imagine the difference between calling someone doctor and calling them daddy. The emotional distance, the intimacy, the type of relationship, everything is completely different. Jesus was revolutionizing how humans relate to the divine. Linguistic studies on Aramaic reveal that Abba was a word used by young children. It was intimate, affectionate, totally informal. Imagine a baby babbling its first words to the Father it loves. This is the energy Jesus was teaching his disciples to use when addressing the Creator, but this was scandalous to the religious traditions of the time. The God of the Jews was Yahweh, the sacred, the untouchable, the name that couldn't even be pronounced. And Jesus was teaching ordinary people to address the universe's creator with the same intimacy as a child talking to its beloved Father. Analyses of ancient texts suggest that when Jesus used Abba, he wasn't just changing a word, he was transforming the entire relationship nature between human and divine, from a relationship of distance and fear to one of closeness and unconditional love. Researchers specializing in Semitic languages indicate that Abba carries deep implications of inheritance and authority. When a child calls the father Abba, there's an intuitive understanding that everything belonging to the Father also belongs to them. It's a word that implies not just relationship, but rights, authority, legitimate inheritance. Jesus was teaching his followers to recognize that everything belonging to the Heavenly Father also belongs to them. His power, his authority, his divine nature, all this is the legitimate inheritance of those who can call the Creator Abba with full awareness. Imagine the revolutionary implications of this. If you are a legitimate child, if you can call the Creator Abba, then you are not just a distant creature begging for mercy. You are an heir, you are family, you carry the same divine essence in your spiritual DNA. But later, religious traditions found this too dangerous. The word Abba was gradually replaced by Father, which is more formal, more distant, more hierarchical. The intimate, familial, heir-like relationship was transformed into a relationship of subject to sovereign. Studies of preserved Aramaic manuscripts reveal that Abba had even deeper connotations. It was a word implying not just paternal love, but mutual recognition. The Father recognizes the Son as an extension of himself, and the Son recognizes their participation in the Father's essential nature. Preserved manuscripts in Eastern Christian communities maintained not just the word Abba, but the spiritual understanding it carries. For them, praying the Lord's Prayer is not begging to a distant God. It's conversing intimately with Abba, recognizing our nature as legitimate children with full divine rights. Some preserved traditions suggest Jesus taught that when we say Abba, we should feel the same security, the same trust, the same certainty of love a child feels in the arms of a father who loves unconditionally. There is no fear, no distance, no doubt about our position in the cosmic family. Linguistic research reveals Abba has a specific sound quality, resonating at frequencies directly affecting the nervous system and consciousness centers. It's not just a word, it's a vibration activating specific states of spiritual receptivity and divine connection. The deepest is that Abba implies two-way communication. It's not just you talking to the Father, it's a conversation. It's a relationship where you can listen, where you can receive direct guidance, where you can feel the loving presence responding to your words with the same intimacy you offer. Mystical traditions preserved speak of a practice where the person silently repeats Abba until the word dissolves into pure union experience. It's no longer you calling the Father, it's the recognition that you and the Father are aspects of the same divine consciousness expressing through different forms. Analyses of ancient Gnostic texts reveal Abba was understood as a vibrational key opening consciousness portals. When pronounced with pure intention and open heart, it dissolved the illusion of separation between the practitioner and the divine source. Manuscripts found in monastic libraries suggest exercises based on conscious Abba repetition. It was a form of meditation leading the practitioner to states of consciousness where the distinction between I and God dissolves into pure unity experience. When you pray Our Father in English, you're speaking to someone you perceive as separate from you. When you pray Abba with full awareness, you're conversing with someone you recognize as your own essence expressed in infinite form, a love that loves you more than you can comprehend and that wants you to recognize your own inner divinity. This is the difference between praying a prayer and living a transformative spiritual experience. This is the difference between external religion and internal awakening. And this is exactly what was removed from the translations that reached us, keeping billions of people in a distant relationship with what is their own divine essence. Now let's get to what was actually removed. The specific petitions Jesus included in the original prayer, but disappeared from the versions we know today. Prepare yourself, because what you'll discover now will completely transform your understanding of the spiritual power this prayer should have. Ancient preserved manuscripts suggest the original version of the Lord's Prayer didn't end with "but deliver us from evil, amen." There were additional petitions, declarations of spiritual power, affirmations of our divine nature systematically removed over the centuries. One of the most significant petitions academic analyses indicate existed was a declaration of our essential unity with the Creator. Something like, "As you live in us, may we live in you, being one in essence and purpose, conscious co-creators of reality." Imagine the revolutionary impact of a prayer, not just asking the Father, but declaring our unity with Him. We are not separate creatures begging for help. We are conscious extensions of divinity, recognizing our true nature and claiming our legitimate spiritual authority. Traditions preserved in isolated Christian communities speak of a petition related to what Jesus called the inner kingdom of heaven, a phrase not just asking for God's will be done on earth, but for our consciousness to be elevated to recognize we're already complete citizens of this kingdom, already carrying its authority and power. Studies of ancient Gnostic texts reveal references to a version of the Lord's Prayer, including an invocation to the inner Christ, the divine aspect existing within each human being. This wasn't an external petition, but a declaration awakening the Christ consciousness within us, waiting to be recognized and activated. Manuscripts found in monastic libraries contain fragments of a petition related to dissolving the illusion of separation. Something like, "May we see with your eyes, love with your heart, serve with your hands," recognizing there is no true separation between Creator and creation. But why were these petitions removed? The uncomfortable answer: because they placed spiritual power directly in the individual's hands. A prayer teaching recognition of one's own divinity doesn't need institutional intermediaries. A declaration of conscious co-creation with God eliminates the need for controlling religious hierarchies. Analyses of preserved oral traditions suggest there was also a petition related to transmuting difficult experiences, not just "forgive us our offenses," but something deeper. May every experience be transformed into wisdom, every difficulty be transmuted into spiritual growth, for we understand all serves our sacred soul's awakening. This more complete version transformed the Lord's Prayer from a petitionary prayer to a declaration of spiritual power. It was not just about conversing with God, it's about activating the consciousness of our own divine nature, recognizing our ability to transform realities, declaring our authority as legitimate children of the Creator. Manuscripts found in ancient monasteries contain fragments of a petition related to what Jesus taught about doing greater works. Something like, "May your power flow through us without obstacles. May we be perfect channels of your will, performing the works you do, manifesting the impossible through our conscious union with you." Imagine praying a version of the Lord's Prayer that not only asks for protection but declares spiritual authority, that not only requests forgiveness but affirms our ability to forgive and transmute, that not only begs for bread but recognizes our capacity to manifest abundance through activated divine consciousness. Traditions preserved in mystical communities speak of a petition related to activating latent spiritual capacities. Something like, "Awaken in us the gifts of the Spirit, that we may see beyond the veil of illusion, hear your voice in all things, manifest your presence through our transformed life." Some preserved traditions speak of a completely different conclusion to the prayer. Instead of ending with a simple "Amen," there was a declaration of gratitude and recognition. "For we are one with you, and with you we co-create reality. So be it, in love and light, now and always, through all times and dimensions." This conclusion is not just the end of a prayer, it's a declaration of conscious partnership with the divine. It's the recognition that we are not victims of circumstances, but active co-creators of our reality, through our conscious union with the source of all life. Preserved manuscripts suggest there was even a petition related to cosmic responsibility. Something like, "May through our transformation all humanity be elevated. May our light awaken light in others. May our union with you accelerate the collective awakening of divine consciousness on earth." The deepest is these additional petitions created a complete spiritual progression within the very prayer. It began with Abba, recognition of divine intimacy, passed through traditional petitions, basic human needs, and culminated with declarations of spiritual power, recognition of inner divinity and co-creative authority. It was a complete prayer, taking a person from a state of ordinary human consciousness to a state of elevated Christ consciousness in minutes. And it was exactly this radical transformative power that was removed from the versions that reached us. In remote world regions, away from religious power centers, some Christian communities managed to preserve traditions never passed through the Great Council's filters. These communities are like spiritual time capsules, guarding versions of Jesus' prayer that maintain elements of original depth and power. In northeast Syria, Christian communities still speaking Aramaic today preserved an oral version of the Lord's Prayer significantly different from anything you've ever heard. They not only maintained the original language, they retained the spiritual understanding accompanying every word, every pause, every intonation. Monasteries in Ethiopia, isolated by mountains and protected by millennia-old traditions, preserved manuscripts containing variations of the Lord's Prayer, including mystical elements, completely removed from Western versions. For them, the prayer is not just a recited text, it's a sophisticated spiritual technology for consciousness elevation and activation of latent divine capacities. Christian communities in southern India, established according to tradition by the Apostle Thomas himself, maintained oral practices suggesting Jesus taught different versions of the prayer for different levels of spiritual understanding. The basic version for faith beginners, intermediate versions for developing disciples, and advanced versions for those ready for radical spiritual transformation. Fascinatingly, these communities, separated by thousands of kilometers and centuries of isolation, preserved consistent elements not appearing in any modern Bible. This strongly suggests these elements are not local inventions or cultural variations, but authentic fragments of original apostolic tradition. Oral traditions preserved in remote Cappadocian villages speak of a version of the Lord's Prayer, recited in 3 distinct parts, one for consciousness purification, one for spiritual elevation, and one for declarations of unity with the divine. It was seen as a complete spiritual journey condensed into a single prayer practice. Some of these communities preserved not just the words, but the complete methodology of how to pray. They understand certain phrases should be pronounced with specific breathing, that certain words carry vibrational frequencies affecting particular consciousness centers, that the complete prayer should be experienced as an expanded state of consciousness, not just verbal recitation. Manuscripts found in Coptic monasteries in Egypt suggest there was a tradition of teaching the Lord's Prayer in progressive layers of depth. First, the simple version for memorization and basic practice. Then an intermediate version with mystical elements for more advanced disciples. Finally, a complete version considered so sacred and powerful it was transmitted orally, from master to chosen disciple. Communities preserved in Lebanon's mountains maintain a practice where the Lord's Prayer is sung in specific melodies according to their traditions, taught by the apostles themselves, who received it directly from Jesus. They believe the combination of Aramaic words with these ancient melodies creates a state of consciousness, allowing for direct and immediate connection with divine presence. Most impressively, isolated villages in Armenia maintained a version including specific hand gestures and body positioning during recitation. For them, the Lord's Prayer isn't just a verbal prayer, it's a complete spiritual practice involving body, mind, emotion, and spirit in harmonic unity. Preserved traditions in remote Georgian communities speak of a version of the Lord's Prayer recited at specific times of day, carefully aligned with natural and energetic cycles. They understood certain words have maximum power at dawn, others at noon, others at dusk. It was a complex and precise spiritual science, not just a simple prayer for any moment. Some of these communities also preserved the full context in which Jesus taught the prayer. According to their oral traditions, it wasn't just one day the disciples asked Jesus to teach them to pray. There was a specific context, a particular spiritual situation. A preparation of consciousness precedes the teaching and is essential to understanding the prayer's true power. Monasteries on Mount Sinai guard manuscripts, suggesting Jesus taught different versions of the prayer for different groups of followers. A version for the crowds following him occasionally, a deeper version for the 70 disciples accompanying him regularly, and an even more complete and powerful version for the 12 intimate apostles. What has reached us through official channels may only be the most basic and simplified version. Christian communities on Greek islands preserved a tradition where the Lord's Prayer was understood as an active spiritual protection formula. But not protection in the passive sense of asking to be defended. Active protection, where the person declares their divine spiritual authority and consciously establishes a sacred energy field around them. Let me ask you directly, now viewing this video, where are you watching this from? Comment your city or country because I want to map how far this revelation is reaching. Is this thirst for a more authentic version of the Lord's Prayer happening globally? Are people around the world simultaneously experiencing this awakening to deeper truth? Comment below where you're from because I suspect what's happening is no coincidence. Perhaps it's time for these truths preserved by isolated communities to finally emerge for the whole world. Perhaps you are part of a global spiritual awakening movement, reclaiming the original wisdom of Christianity. Share your location in the comments and let's see if we are indeed many, scattered around the world, but united by this same thirst for spiritual authenticity. It's time to put side by side what you know and what was hidden. This comparison will reveal not just technical differences, but the profound impact these changes had on your spiritual experience and that of billions throughout history. Known version, Our Father who art in heaven. Original version suggested by ancient manuscripts, Abba, breath of life, divine presence permeating all heavens and earth, living within and through me. Notice the fundamental difference. The first version places God in a specific distant place called heaven. The second recognizes the divine presence as something permeating all reality, including yourself. It's not a God up there observing from afar. It's a living presence breathing through all creation, including your own being. Known version, Hallowed be thy name. Version preserved in ancient traditions. May your name resonate through our being, awakening our sacred nature, activating the divinity sleeping within us. The difference is revolutionary. The first version treats sanctification as something external we do for God. The second recognizes that when the sacred name resonates through us, our divine nature is awakened and activated. It's not about making God holy, it's about recognizing and activating our inner holiness. Known version, Thy kingdom come. Version suggested by analyses of ancient texts. May your kingdom manifest through us, for it already perfectly dwells in our hearts, waiting for our conscious recognition. Here's one of the most significant and transformative changes. The known version speaks of the kingdom as a future thing to come from outside. The original version recognizes the kingdom already present and complete within us, needing only to be consciously manifested through our transformed lives. Known version, Thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Version preserved in mystical traditions. May our will perfectly align with yours, for we are one in essence, and together we co-create earthly reality in the image of heavenly perfection. The difference is profound and empowering. The first suggests passive submission to divine will. The second proposes conscious alignment and active partnership in reality's co-creation. We're not passive recipients of divine decrees. We're conscious collaborators in cosmic manifestation. Known version, Give us this day our daily bread. A version suggested by academic studies, continuously grant essential nourishment for our spiritual growth, for you are the infinite source of all abundance, and as your children, that abundance is our natural inheritance. Here we see the transformative expansion of the bread concept. It's not just basic physical sustenance, but spiritual nourishment, consciousness growth, abundance on all existence levels. It isn't something we beg, but boldly claim as the legitimate inheritance of divine children. Known version, And forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Version preserved in ancient manuscripts. Transmute our limitations into wisdom, as we transmute others' limitations into compassion, for we understand all is part of the sacred soul's learning. The difference is completely transformative. The first version focuses on forgiveness as absolution from guilt. The second focuses on transmutation as spiritual evolution. It's not about forgetting mistakes or pretending they didn't happen. It's about consciously transforming all experiences into growth and wisdom. Known version, And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Version suggested by preserved traditions, strengthen our connection with you, so we see through the illusion of separation, recognizing there is no true evil, only spiritual growth opportunities and consciousness awakening. This may be the deepest and most liberating change. The known version implies God might lead us into evil, creating a contradictory and confusing image of the divine nature. The original version recognizes what we perceive as evil is often just our lack of spiritual understanding or disguised opportunities for consciousness evolution. Known conclusion, Amen. Conclusion preserved in ancient traditions, for we are one with you and with you we manifest the kingdom. So be it, in love and light, now and always through all times and dimensions, eternal gratitude for our shared divinity. The final difference reveals everything. The first conclusion is a simple passive agreement. The second is a powerful declaration of unity, co-creative authority, and eternal purpose. It is the final recognition of our divine nature and cosmic responsibility. When you compare these versions honestly, it's crystal clear we're not talking about minor translation variations or small cultural differences. We're talking about two completely different understandings of our relationship with the divine. One places us as needy servants begging a distant God. The other recognizes us as powerful children, conscious co-creators of reality, essentially united with the source of all life. Now let's focus on what really matters, how this revolutionary discovery transforms your practical spiritual life. Because knowing the historical truth is pointless if it doesn't generate a real, tangible, transformative experience in your daily life, in your relationships, in your consciousness, and in your ability to manifest a truly divine life. When you pray the original version of the Lord's Prayer, with full awareness of what each word means and the power each phrase carries, something fundamental and irreversible changes in your relationship with the divine. It's no longer a conversation between you and a distant, separate God. It's a dialogue between aspects of the same divine consciousness, you recognizing your essential union with the source of all life. The first transformation people report when experiencing the more complete version is a profound sense of authentic spiritual empowerment. Instead of feeling small, limited, and needy before an all-powerful and distant God, you begin to recognize your own divine nature. It's not spiritual arrogance. It's the awakening of true humility that acknowledges the infinite greatness God placed within you. Imagine how radically your perspective changes when you're no longer asking the Father as a spiritual beggar, but remembering with Him who you truly are. When you're no longer pleading for provision as someone abandoned and needy, but recognizing that as the legitimate child of the Creator, divine abundance is your natural and inalienable inheritance. Studies on spiritual practices indicate prayers recognizing our inner divinity produce radically different consciousness states from those emphasizing our separation and need. It's the neurological and spiritual difference between spiritual begging and asserting divine authority. The brain, the nervous system, and energy centers respond in completely different ways. People who began experiencing the more complete version report profound and lasting changes in how they deal with challenges, crises, and difficulties. Instead of just asking God to solve their problems as passive victims, they start to recognize their own divine power to transmute difficult situations into opportunities for growth and miracle manifestation. The original version teaches a completely different and transformative way of forgiving. It's not just letting go of offenses or pretending they didn't happen, but deeply understanding that both you and the person who offended you are undergoing spiritual learning experiences. It's a cosmic perspective, transforming resentment into genuine compassion and freeing both parties. When you pray recognizing the kingdom of heaven is already perfectly present within you, your relationship with external circumstances changes drastically. You stop seeking happiness, peace, and fulfillment in external situations because you recognize the inexhaustible source of all this already dwells within you, waiting only for your conscious recognition. The full version of the Lord's Prayer functions as a powerful daily recalibration of your consciousness. Every time you recite it with full understanding and open heart, you're literally reprogramming your mind to remember your true spiritual identity. It's like wiping away the mental programming of limitation and consciously reinstalling the matrix of divinity. But here's something crucial that needs to be stated clearly. This transformation doesn't happen automatically just because you know the correct words or change the prayer's text. It's necessary to pray with expanded awareness, a genuinely open heart, a real willingness to let your limited identity dissolve into the greater truth of who you really are. Ancient contemplative practices suggest the original version of the Lord's Prayer should be recited in 3 progressive depth levels. First with the mind, intellectually understanding the meaning, then with the heart, emotionally feeling the truth, and finally with the spirit, existentially being the truth. It's a progressive process of total integration. People making this transition from the simplified version to the full version often report beginning to experience direct responses to their prayers in ways they've never experienced before. Not because God changed his attitude, but because they completely changed the frequency at which they're communicating with the divine. The original version awakens what mystics from all traditions call Christ consciousness, not external adoration of Jesus as a historical figure, but awakening the same quality of consciousness Jesus demonstrated. The lived understanding that you and the Father are one, that the kingdom is within you, that you have real spiritual authority to transform reality through your divine consciousness. This isn't just an emotional, intellectual, or religious experience. It is a transformation affecting all aspects of your existence. Your relationships become more loving and authentic. Your decisions become wiser and aligned. Your presence becomes more spiritually powerful. Your capacity to manifest expands dramatically. Most profoundly, when you pray the full version with full awareness, you're not just speaking to God, you're allowing God to speak through you. The words become a divine declaration coming from your mouth, an affirmation of cosmic truth being pronounced through your transformed human consciousness. That's what Jesus meant when he taught we'd do greater works. Not greater because we're superior to him, but greater because he taught us to recognize and use the same divine consciousness he used. The complete version of the Lord's Prayer is one of the master keys to accessing this Christ consciousness and manifesting it through your daily life. When you practice consistently, your life becomes a living prayer, a constant declaration of your divine nature, a continuous manifestation of the kingdom of heaven on earth through your transformed presence. Now we need to confront the most uncomfortable yet necessary question. Why were such powerful and transformative truths deliberately removed from Christianity's most important prayer? Why were teachings that could elevate all humanity to higher consciousness levels systematically suppressed? The answer isn't a fanciful conspiracy theory. It's a documented political and sociological reality. When you understand how power structures work throughout history, you perfectly understand why teachings that empower people spiritually are always seen as dangerous by institutions depending on control to maintain their authority. Imagine an entire population recognizing their divine spiritual authority. People knowing they can communicate directly with God without intermediaries, recognizing their ability to transmute difficult situations through consciousness, understanding they carry within themselves the same transformational power Jesus demonstrated. Does this population still need religious mediators to access the divine? Historical documents from the early councils reveal ongoing and explicit concern about what they called dangerous doctrines, teachings placing spiritual authority in ordinary individuals' hands. The complete version of the Lord's Prayer perfectly fit this category of dangerous knowledge needing control. The strategy used was subtle, yet devastatingly effective. Maintain enough elements of the original prayer to preserve the appearance of authenticity and historical continuity, but remove exactly those elements, imparting real transformational spiritual power to the practitioner. The result was a prayer that sounds sacred and familiar, but keeps the practitioner in a position of spiritual dependence. Sociological analyses of religious movements throughout history show a consistent and predictable pattern. Teachings emphasizing individual spiritual authority are systematically marginalized, altered, or eliminated by institutions relying on centralized hierarchies to maintain their political, economic, and social power. Most disturbingly, this suppression process didn't stop in the early centuries. Every new translation, every new denomination, every new reform movement had the historical opportunity to restore the original version, but consciously chose to keep the version preserving institutional control structures. Why? Because even sincere and well-meaning religious leaders were culturally conditioned to believe versions empowering believers spiritually are dangerous or heretical. They genuinely believe ordinary people aren't prepared spiritually to recognize their divine inner nature without clerical supervision. There's also the factor of genuine and understandable fear, a version of the Lord's Prayer, teaching each person to recognize their power of conscious co-creation. With the divine places an enormous spiritual responsibility on practitioners' shoulders. It's psychologically safer to maintain aversion, treating people as dependent and needy spiritual children. But here's the devastating historical irony. Jesus never treated his followers as incapable spiritual dependents. He constantly empowered them, saying, "Ye are gods, the kingdom is within you, ye shall do greater works than these." The original version of the Lord's Prayer was perfectly aligned with this revolutionary approach to spiritual empowerment. Preserved traditions suggest Jesus clearly understood humanity was undergoing a consciousness evolutionary process. The complete version of the Lord's Prayer was a specific tool to accelerate this evolution, to awaken latent spiritual capacities, to prepare humanity for higher levels of consciousness and cosmic responsibility. But later, religious leaders decided unilaterally humanity wasn't ready for this accelerated evolution. They chose to maintain versions preserving the spiritual status quo, rather than those catalyzing genuine transformation and mass empowerment. The result was devastating for human spiritual evolution. An entire humanity was deprived of one of Jesus's most powerful spiritual awakening tools, left as a legacy. Generations and generations prayed a diluted and censored version without ever accessing the original version's transformational power. During the Middle Ages, the control intensified. The Inquisition specifically persecuted groups practicing unauthorized versions of fundamental Christian prayers. Possessing manuscripts with full versions of the Lord's Prayer could result in charges of heresy, torture, and death. It was total and terroristic control over people's spiritual experience. But it wasn't just concealment, it was systematic substitution. The simplified version wasn't honestly presented as a basic version or version for beginners. It was dishonestly presented as the complete and definitive version. Millions lived and died, believing they knew the complete prayer Jesus taught. Documents from ancient monasteries suggest monks and mystics knew the original version, yet were specifically instructed not to teach it publicly. It was preserved as advanced knowledge for a chosen few, instead of being offered as the legitimate spiritual inheritance of all humanity. During the Renaissance, when ancient manuscripts were rediscovered, there were opportunities to restore more authentic versions. But the fear of social and religious instability prevailed over the commitment to historical and spiritual truth. Even reformers like Luther, who criticized many church practices, chose to keep the already established versions of the Lord's Prayer to avoid additional controversies. Fear of change overcame the desire for authenticity. The truth is, it's time to undo this millennia-long historical injustice. It's time to return to humanity what has always been its divine right: access to the complete, powerful, transformative version of the prayer Jesus truly taught. You no longer have to accept spiritual crumbs. You no longer have to settle for versions diluted for political convenience. The complete truth is available, and you have the divine, inalienable right to access, practice, and share it. We have reached the end of this journey of historical and spiritual revelation, but in truth, we've only just begun your personal journey of transformation and awakening of consciousness. What you've discovered today wasn't just information. It was a direct invitation from the divine for a deeper, more authentic, more powerful relationship. You now carry knowledge hidden from billions for centuries. You know there's a deeper, more powerful, more authentic version of Christianity's most important prayer. You understand why it was altered and who benefited from the alteration. The crucial question now is, what will you do with this transformative revelation? Some will watch this video, feel impacted for a few minutes, maybe share it with some friends, and then return to normal life, continuing to pray the simplified version as if nothing has changed, as if this discovery was just historical curiosity. Others will recognize this discovery as a sacred invitation from the divine to a deeper, more intimate, more empowered relationship with the source of all life. The choice is entirely yours, and it defines the course of your spiritual evolution. You can continue to be an occasional visitor in the Father's house, or you can begin living consciously as the legitimate child you've always been. You can continue asking for spiritual crumbs, or courageously claim your full divine inheritance. If you choose to deepen this transformative journey, start today by experimenting with the more complete version we've revealed. Pray with expanded consciousness, recognizing each word as a powerful declaration of your true spiritual identity. Feel the profound difference in your inner experience, your connection with the divine, your ability to manifest real changes. But always remember, knowledge without consistent practice is just sterile information. Real transformation happens when you incorporate these truths into your daily life, allowing them to change not only how you pray, but how you live, relate, and see yourself and the world around you. This revelation isn't just for you to keep secretly, it's to be consciously shared with those ready to hear. Don't force anyone. Don't be an aggressive evangelist, but be available and open to those who, like you, thirst for a more authentic and transformative spirituality. If this video awakened something deep and permanent within you, if you feel this message arrived at the right moment in your life, if you recognize that this discovery can change everything, then subscribe to this channel now. Because this is just a small part of a much larger knowledge being revealed in these times of global awakening. Activate the bell to be notified immediately, because in upcoming videos, we will continue exploring hidden truths, suppressed teachings, marginalized spiritual practices. You are part of a historically privileged generation recovering the authentic wisdom of original Christianity. And when you finish watching this entire video, click on the next one appearing on the screen. Because the awakening journey that began here continues there, with even deeper and more transformative revelations waiting for you. Your soul recognized these truths because they have always been within you, patiently waiting for the right moment to emerge. That moment is now. That generation is yours. This awakening is real and irreversible. Thank you for watching to the end. Until the next video.